Hello, I'm Michael Jones from Future, and I'm delighted to be speaking with Peter Fisk from GeniusWorks. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Michael. Great to talk to you.
You too. Tell me, Peter, why should companies be concerned with increasing their positive impact for all? Why does this all matter?
Well, I guess the first point is we're all familiar with the challenge which we all face, which is that we as citizens, but we as companies in particular, are living beyond our means. So we take more from the earth than we give back. And we've spent the last certainly decade increasingly realizing that we need to do something about our negative impacts in terms of trying to reduce the damage we cause. And that's kind of typically been kind of reducing our carbon emissions, our waste, and other factors such as that. But the big question really is, you could reduce all of those things, and the best way to reduce them all would be to not exist. So you would end up in a world where people don't exist or businesses don't exist, and so they don't make any negative impact. The real question is, why do they exist? And so how can they make a more positive impact on the world, both environmentally and socially? And that's where I think businesses have a real opportunity, because if you have a more positive impact, or certainly a net positive impact, taking into account the negatives and the positives, then you can engage people more emotionally. You can rebuild trust, which many businesses have lost with consumers. And you can then start to rethink your business model in terms of what is the value I create and how do I share that value between all my stakeholders, be they shareholders, employees, customers, or society.
Peter, on that front, why is it so important to rebuild trust? You mentioned about engaging emotionally with people. Why is that so important?
Well, I guess because in the fundamental basis, we rely upon the trust of our stakeholders to want to contribute to the business, employees to give their time and their talents, and customers to give their custom, investors to give their money, and to society to give the franchise to operate, if you like. And so, corporate reputation has dived over recent years, and trust in general, if you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, is at one of its lowest ever ebbs, both for institutional organizations, but also for businesses. So if we want to have the franchise to operate, if we want to have the goodwill of our customers and ultimately the retention and loyalty, we need to build trust.
Fantastic. Now, you believe that business leaders need to start thinking about their handprints rather than their footprints. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's an interesting term, isn't it? So, we've all focused on our footprints. What is our carbon footprint? What is our environmental footprint? What is the negative impact which we have on the world? And obviously, that is an essential thing to do, particularly in terms of reducing our carbon emissions and our waste and impact on the negative impacts on society. But if we think about what is the positive impact we can have, we need kind of a better term. And so handprints is kind of an alternative way of thinking about it. And by handprints, I mean the positive impact or the net positive impact which you have. And there's two ways of thinking about it. One is both the handprints in terms of what you can contribute to the world. So both environmentally, in terms of that might be regeneration of soils or habitats or resources, or it might be in terms of contribution to society. And obviously there's the simple things like we give jobs to society, we contribute to the local society around us and in other ways, and we contribute through our products and services to people's health, happiness, and productivity. So those handprints become, if you like, a measure of the positive impact. But there's also one other thing. When you connect hands together, you start to amplify the impact. And one of the things I think, brands in particular have not really kind of thought about in that much detail yet is how they can be platforms to amplify their impact. So it's not so much what you do yourself as a company, it's what you enable 1 million people to do, or 1 billion people to do. So it's the multiplication of the impact you can have if you create an environment where you enable people to do good themselves.
Great answer. Thank you, Peter. Now let's talk about what kind of goals should a company be setting if they are striving to be more sustainable? How do you measure those goals?
Well, in some ways, it's the same goals as always, because we're not saying this is against financial success. And so if you want to be a sustainable business, it means you want to be in business for the long term. So you want to look at ways in which you can create money. You want to be a profitable business. And then once you've got a profitable business and it's a sustainable, profitable business over a number of years, that gives you a choice. That gives you a choice in terms of, well, how do you want to allocate that profit to the different stakeholders? That might be to reinvest in the company, to innovate products and services. It might be to reward your staff. It might be to contribute more to society or whatever. And so if you can get that long-term flow of profit by having a financially effective business, that gives you the opportunity to do much, much more. So I think that's the output, if you like. That's a measure of an output, and value creation in terms of economic value creation is still a worthy goal. And if you look, why do investors increasingly invest in companies? Because they have a sustainable future ahead of them. That's why they want to invest, and that's why they want to see the returns on those investments. But behind that, you then have a series of other metrics, which says, how are you doing? And how are you good in terms of making that system, in terms of allocating the profits to all the different stakeholders, effective, so that they build on each other over time, so that the innovations deliver better products, which engage more customers, which engage better employees, which reward shareholders more, and ultimately reward society more. So I think you have to have the right metrics for the right organization. There's not one set. And so being able to think about, what is your goal as the organization? And then think about, is it in terms of carbon emissions? And that might be a crucial one if you are a heavy carbon emitter, like steel industry or airline, for example. Or it might be in terms of water. If you're in the fashion industry, it might be in terms of the social impact if you're in, say, the food industry. And so being able to think about, what is right for your business. But I would say, we've got these 17 SDGs, and I think they're still a pretty good metric to help organizations, a checklist, if you like, to help organizations keep thinking about which areas should they focus their efforts on in order to make that contribution to society at the same time. And the UN Global Compact estimated it that if businesses could achieve those 17 SDGs or contribute to achieving them, there's a $12 trillion business opportunity in terms of making money at the same time as making the world a better place.
Fantastic. And in terms of that net positive impact, those handprints that you were discussing, what successful examples are there of companies that have focused on the handprint that they leave?
I think a great one is Schneider Electric, the French energy company. And they were ranked the #1 world's most sustainable company last year by Corporate Knights. But they're just a great, interesting company as well, in the sense of we're in the throes of an energy transition from carbon to clean energy. And one of the biggest challenges for all these clean energy companies, whether they wind or solar or whatever, is energy storage and energy management. And that's where Schneider really focused their effort. And so Schneider have really thought about how can you both accelerate the shift towards sustainable energy, but also what is the right business model to do that. And they developed a decentralized strategy. So rather than having a centralized kind of power plant where you then distribute all of the energy from there, they said, well, how can society, be it individual households or factories or farms, be able to generate their own energy and ultimately use what they need, and then they can contribute the rest to their local grid. So that's a form of decentralization. And they if you like, they're using a handprint model, and they estimate that they can create an 85 times greater impact through the impacts they allow other people to create, as opposed to just themselves. So the multiplication factor, if you like, is much, much greater. Another example would be Unilever. So Unilever were perhaps one of the first companies to really take on board sustainability in a positive sense in a big way. and Paul Polman, who was the CEO of that company for a decade, then he really was a person who set out his stall, and he said in 2010, we want to halve our carbon emissions and double our profits at the same time. And the whole premise was that you can do both, and that reducing the carbon emissions gives you the catalysts, give you the innovation opportunities, if you like, to rethink how you do things and to create more value for the organization, through the organization, and then to be more successful financially too.
Excellent. And what kind of impact can that style of thinking that you've just described have on the world of, say, Sofidel, so tissue paper production, or business overall?
Well, Sofidel is a really interesting example because tissue paper is in every one of our homes, every one of our bathrooms, and it can be that boring white tissue paper. And we think about it in terms of hygiene and a necessity. It's functional. But we could also think about it as an emotional thing. It's an essential part of life. It's about health. It's about family. It's about, if you like, it could be about the beauty of your bathroom or something which is personal or intimate within your home. So I think being able to think about how can we contribute to healthy, happy families, and how can we contribute to enriching home life is actually an opportunity of tissue paper. So rather than just thinking about the paper or the product itself, think about what can we do once we're there? How can we contribute towards the ways in which people and families feel about themselves and their homes? And through product innovations, we can enhance that further, be it in terms of textures, colors, and much, much more. And we all recognize that brands are much more than products themselves. And how do you contribute towards the brand equity and therefore do something more for people? If we can, at the same time as Sofidel and the ecosystem of partners which we have, which go through the sourcing and the manufacturing of the paper, then if we can get the lowest footprint, the least negative impact, we can then also help all of those citizens to use the best tissue paper, which then contributes to their positive handprints. Excellent.
Peter, now, before joining the corporate world, I understand you worked as a nuclear physicist. How has that influenced your career today?
Yeah, I try not to tell anybody that, but what a great question. I think probably three things. So firstly, when you explore science, and particularly physics, it's about how the world works or how the natural world works. And one of the big things there is it's all connected. It works as a system. And so be it in terms of the solar system, or be it in terms of the natural world or what happens inside an atom, then they work as systems, and one thing affects another. And so understanding the connectedness of an environment, I think, was a great kind of insight, which then obviously applies to the world today. If we're thinking about Sofidel's ecosystem, if we're thinking about circular economy type of business models, we have to think in systems. Another thing which is really interesting is that I think physics is it's an experimental subject, and a lot of the time you spend in a physics lab trying to prove something. And in order to do that, you have to hypothesize, first of all. So to hypothesize, you have to have a creative leap of faith, and so you have to imagine that something could exist in a certain way. And I think that's one of the things which businesses need today. They need to be much better in terms of hypothesizing how could we do things differently. So how could we maybe work differently as an ecosystem of partners? How could we work differently in terms of business model, in terms of the revenues and cost structures? And then test it to see whether it works. And so being able to leap forward with an intuitive kind of creativity, and then be able to test things and measure them to see whether they work, is a big part of driving progress, both inside organizations, but in the natural world as well. And I think the other thing about physics is that, there's no end point in a sense. There's so much more to discover still. And the same goes for business. There's so much more we can discover about better ways in which we can operate.
And Peter, in terms of doing things differently, and as you said, driving progress. You have worked with hundreds of different clients throughout your career. Looking back, what do you think is the most important factor for those businesses in determining whether innovative strategies succeed or fail? What links them?
I think it's the people, to be honest. So, you know, a strategy is good as is as good as the piece of paper which it's written on. And the thing about strategies about strategies today is that the world keeps changing. And so we need to keep moving with the changing world. And we live in a world of uncertainty, complexity. So we're probably not going to get it right first time. So there are probably no perfect strategies. You probably don't need a perfect strategy. You probably need a 80% strategy, which gives you a direction. And then you need to get out there and see what works. And so it's the ability of people to hang on to the strategy in terms of a direction. So it gives them some focus and helps them to make decisions, but also to be willing to adapt and to innovate as they go over time. So I think that's the big thing. There's the strategy of any organization, when you get sort of to a point of success, it's probably very different from how they planned it originally. And so being able to kind of keep moving forwards and keep adapting that strategy over time is probably the biggest kind of factor which has kind of made successful companies, the winners.
Peter, you mentioned that there are no perfect strategies, but we are seeing, as you mentioned from the examples you used earlier, there are lots of companies that have very lofty ambitions of being very profitable and very sustainable at the same time. Mm-hmm. How is it possible to be truly profitable and truly sustainable?
Well, I think, that's one of the great kind of misnomers of our time, is that you either have to be good for the world or you can be good financially. Yeah. The reality, if you look at companies, let me give you some examples. Look at Tesla. Tesla, as love it or hate it, Elon Musk, but look at Tesla as an organization. It's an $800 billion organization. Its purpose statement is to accelerate the world's transition towards clean energy. So it is a sustainable company in many, many different ways, and it's accelerating people's use of clean energy vehicles and mobility in general. And so being able to kind of really think about, that's a big, lofty, sustainable goal, but it's making a ton of money at the same time. If you look at companies like Unilever, we talked about, IKEA would be a great one, voted as one of the most sustainable companies in the world. Look at Allbirds, the sneakers made from New Zealand wool. So creating something which is more comfortable, more stylish, but also desirable at the same time, which people will pay more money for. Look at companies like EcoAlf from Spain. So, using waste plastic bottles and turn it into beautiful fabrics. And so being able to constantly kind of think about, how can I actually create something better, which is sustainable, enables you then to be able to create something which is valued by customers, so they potentially pay more for it. And ultimately, you start to create a productive business which people want to invest in, people want to work for.
Brilliant, Peter. Thank you. A final question from me. Tell me about Sofidel's 3S Awards. What are you most looking forward to about the event?
I think the great thing about the awards is that it brings the entire ecosystem together. So, it's not just about the product. It's not just about Sofidel, the individual company, but it's about all of the partners who can make a successful product and service and business thrive in today's world. So they might be in terms of producers of wood pulp, or they might be distributors and logistics companies, whatever it might be, bringing together all the partners. And I think one of the big things which we've seen in terms of the last few years, a shift of organizations, is that ecosystems win over individual companies. And, the 3S Awards really celebrates the ecosystem working together to create a better world.
Fantastic. On that note, Peter, thank you so much for joining us today, and appreciate your time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Peter.